Good afternoon. My name is Christine Dunn, and I'm the Director for Community Engagement here at Lutheran Social Services of the National Capital Area. As we get started, I do want to let you know that this session will be recorded. Since 1917, LSSNCA, a Human Services and Immigration Relief and Refugee Agency, has accompanied those in need throughout Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. We aim to foster resiliency, self-sufficiency, and access to opportunities. We are committed to ensuring those arriving in our communities continue to feel welcomed and valued, and we are counting on your support. Prior to my work with LSSNCA, I served 13 years in the parish as a Lutheran pastor. I come to this work with a deep sense of calling. I know we all choose to be involved in the work of welcome for various reasons, either because of our faith understanding, a moral imperative, or an ethical calling, or maybe all three. While we may claim different faith traditions, all holy scriptures, the Quran, the Torah, and the Gospels, are built on the deep belief that each person carries an inherent dignity given to them by the divine, however we choose to name them. Grounded in our faith traditions, we know that despite political unrest or grievous uncertainty, hope cannot be squelched. Presidents and governments are not responsible for liberation and salvation. We are. There is significant and meaningful work ahead, and so we are thankful that you have chosen to spend the next hour with us to explore what shape that work may be taking. Together, we have the power to create a community where those fleeing hardship find not just shelter, but also friendship, dignity, and hope for a brighter future. Joining us today is Kristen Peck. She has served as LSSNCA's Chief Executive Officer for 4 years and has extensive experience in serving forcibly displaced persons, both nationally and internationally. She has provided testimony before Congress and the United Nations Refugee Agency in Geneva. Most recently, Kristen led LSSNCA's response to the largest humanitarian crisis in a generation, providing refugee resettlement services to 4,500 Afghan allies in the DC metro area. Additionally, she currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Refugee Council USA Board of Directors. We also have Larry Bartlett, who served as a career member of the Senior Executive Service at the U.S. Department of State. He directed the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program for the Bureau of Populations, Refugees, and Migration for more than 15 years. While at the State Department, he directed all humanitarian assistance programs inside Syria and Turkey in 2018, and then in 2021, the resettlement of 80,000 Afghans who were evacuated to U.S. military bases. He is the recipient of the Secretary of State's Career Achievement Award and 2 Presidential Rank Awards for senior leadership in refugee protection and resettlement. And finally, Mamadou Sai will be sharing with us. Mamadou has 20 years of experience at LSSNCA and serves as Chief Operating Officer, overseeing LSSNCA's refugee and immigration services. He holds a PhD in Egyptology and is the author of several peer-reviewed articles. Mamadou has chaired or participated in numerous boards and committees that seek to expand services to immigrants, including the Maryland Governor's Commission on African Affairs and the Baltimore's Immigration Summit Committee. We are looking forward to their insight over the next hour. There will be time for questions at the end. I do also want to note that there's a lot to unpack related to immigration, and today we will be focusing on refugee resettlement. We plan to host a town hall on the topic of asylum seekers when more information is available. Okay, on to our panelists. Kristen, the first question is for you. LSSNCA has over a 100-year history of welcoming forcibly displaced people. How has the organization adapted to shifting political landscapes while staying true to its mission of creating communities of safety and belonging?
Thanks so much, Christine, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our lunch hour. We really appreciate it. And Christine, to answer your question, at LSSNCA, our vision, which is building inclusive and diverse communities where people thrive. It's timeless. And over the past 100 years, we have time and again found ourselves at the forefront of issues facing our community. And each time we've found ways to serve and help people move from surviving to thriving, whether that was assisting families impacted by the Great Depression, whether that was piloting the first camp for kids impacted by HIV/AIDS in the 90s, originating local pro bono pro se asylum workshops for Afghan allies in 2021, or launching a resource center in 2023, which serves as a community hub for new neighbors we have welcomed to our community. And fostering belonging and safety is the heart of what we do. We have survived the past 100 years and will for the next 100 years because of all of you on this call today. We are blessed to be in an area of the country with a community that is so generous and so committed to creating diverse and welcoming communities and ensuring no one is left behind. As an LSSNCA supporter, each one of you plays a crucial role in helping us carry out our mission, even during uncertain times. You were there 4 years ago when LSSNCA found itself at the forefront of our response to Operation Allies Welcome in Northern Virginia. And as you remember, after California and Texas, Virginia welcomed more Afghan allies than any other state. And LSSNCA began serving Afghan allies before they were eligible for federal benefits and services. And we did so with a skeleton team working out of church basements. And we did that because it's the right thing to do. We were only able to do this because of the generosity of all of you, of this community. You showed up, you broke our records for volunteer signups. You actually broke our website for a day because we couldn't accommodate so many of you who were trying to volunteer and donate. You provided us with so many in-kind donations that we needed to use schools and church basements to store them. And that was the origin of our resource center today. You have been by our side these past 4 years as we built new service lines to extend the long welcome beyond the initial arrival of our new neighbors. This has looked like building a legal services program to help individuals apply for family reunification, adjust their status, and apply for humanitarian relief. It looks like building wellness services to support families who need help processing their grief and their trauma. And it looks like building a strong workforce development program, which doesn't just focus on survival jobs, but also focuses on helping our new neighbors thrive. These programs include our entrepreneurial SOAR program in collaboration with George Mason University, through which Ahmad and Mina, refugees from Afghanistan, were supported and guided by our team as they launched a nonprofit, an import business, and a jewelry company. Like us, you know that refugees and immigrants make our communities better. And regardless of what happens after January 20th, LSSNCA remains steadfast in our mission to serve those who've been forced to flee, and our work providing support to new neighbors that we've welcomed together over the past several years will continue, although with less government support, and we can't do that work without you.
Thanks for sharing all the ways that LSS has innovated over the years to respond to people in need in our community. I also just love the antidote that they broke the website. What a statement to the support that LSSNCA has received. I also heard you say that you anticipate less government support in the coming years and that community support will be more important now than ever. So thank you. My next question is, how can the community support LSSNCA in advocacy and engagement to ensure the U.S. continues to uphold its commitment to welcoming those who seek refuge?
Thanks, Christine. Mobilizing your elected officials can be a really effective way to get bipartisan support and push back against what we're expecting, which is anti-refugee narratives, executive orders, and policies at a federal level. This is really a time for all of us to be very clear on our values and our principles. And we'll do that at LSSNCA by issuing public statements when we see executive orders or policies that are inhumane, that don't allow access to due process, that separate families, or when we hear rhetoric that is harmful or dehumanizing. And we'll continue to tell stories about the impact that refugees and other forcibly displaced persons make in our community. We are speaking to state and local officials, faith leaders, and business leaders about what the impact might look like if the refugee program were to be dismantled, as happened during Trump 1.0. And it's important that your local officials hear from you, that you stand behind our country's legacy of welcoming forcibly displaced persons, and that you believe that refugees and immigrants are good for our community. If you are a person of faith, share what your faith says about welcoming strangers and providing for the less fortunate. The work of welcome, as Christine mentioned earlier, transcends all world religions. If you have lived experience, share your story. If you have stories from your experience volunteering with us or befriending someone with a forced migration experience, share those stories. Stories can be just as, if not more, powerful in changing hearts and minds than data. There's also plenty of data that supports that our communities are better off because of refugees and immigrants. Beyond advocacy, we also anticipate needing more volunteers. And this might sound counterintuitive to you because we're also anticipating less refugee arrivals, but we're still responsible for welcoming the neighbors that we welcomed over the years. And we anticipate funding for that ongoing support to decrease. So there are so many ways to volunteer, helping our new neighbors with resume writing, interview practice, serving as a mentor for refugee youth, volunteering at our resource center in Northern Virginia, helping inventory in-kind donations, and assisting a family with their shopping experience. Sign up for a newsletter so you can stay informed, and don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like us to help you prepare for a meeting with your local elected officials, or if you want us to join you. If you have a connection you'd like us to meet, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you have an idea that you want to float by us, we'd love to hear it. There's power in this community, and creating the world that we want to see is up to all of us.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for reminding us that it's the responsibility also of the community to welcome. And it's really helpful to know that when speaking with our elected officials, you're recommending sharing stories and speaking about our faith's call to welcome the stranger. I know that sometimes it can feel intimidating to reach out to elected officials, like I would need like a lot of data and specifics. But hearing you say that the human connection, whether it's my faith or the storytelling, is effective is really helpful. Thank you so much. Larry, my next questions are for you. So as someone who has overseen the U.S. refugee admissions program during the previous Trump administration, what specific policy changes should we anticipate in the first 100 days of the incoming administration, particularly in areas like refugee resettlement, SIV, TPS, and family reunification?
Sure. Thank you, Christine. First of all, I want to note that I am a new member of the board of LSSNCA, and I am so delighted to be continuing to serve refugees through leadership and through this organization. So I'm really honored to be part of this great group now. Let me take you back just for a moment and maybe do a little scene setting. I think as Kristen mentioned, this program is a humanitarian program, and it has been largely apolitical until the first Trump administration. It has, and it continues to have, I believe, support on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Some people are more outspoken than others, but I have certainly, in my 25 years at the State Department, met with Republicans and Democrats on the Hill who had deep concern and interest in this program. And the concern was to keep it going. The concern was to make sure we were accessing populations that really needed our assistance. So I really do believe at the grassroots level on the Hill and in the communities, this program has strong support. Unfortunately, what we saw in the Trump first administration was at the level of the president and his senior advisors, including Stephen Miller, it did not have that strong support. So I think, what we can expect is, in the first Trump administration, in January, the so-called Muslim ban was launched, and there was a political statement that the White House was trying to send. They certainly did. They restricted or tried to restrict the entry of most Islamic populations based on a security threat argument. the that Muslim ban was challenged in the courts by some of the refugee agencies. It took 3 to 4 months until the courts finally were upheld. I think it was the third or fourth executive order. So I do think this time in January, if the program becomes targeted, it will probably be more efficient, if you will, because I think the first Trump administration learned a number of lessons in their 4 years about how to craft statements and policy so that it would actually withstand legal review. But at the same time, the program over the 4 years of Trump continued to go down. So the first year he really wanted just 50,000 arrivals, and then it went each year he set the target lower and lower. So the second year, his first full year, he set it at 45,000, which is actually kind of astonishingly high if you think about what happened after that. Then it went to 30,000, then it went to 18,000, and then in his final 3 months, he set it at 15,000. So I think we can expect a pretty reduced level of entry. I do think in January, whatever the Biden administration has accomplished at that point, which I think will be probably 30, 35,000, somewhere in that range, that could be it for the year. And I think we'll have to see what executive orders or what statements, or even just what orders are made, because the president does have the right to stop arrivals. The program is legislated by Congress, so it's allowed and it has certain framework that was put into place by Congress through the Refugee Act of 1980, but it's not requirement that refugees enter, and so it really is discretionary. And so DHS is the entity that allows entry. I think they would be the ones that would be given an order, maybe stop arrivals, whatever the rationale would be. It could again be security, it could be community capacity, it could be housing, a number of issues that probably could be put out there. Some of them, legitimate, if you will, but certainly in kind of contravention to what this program is about, which is about really protecting people. I think in August and September, when the president sets the level for fiscal year 25, that will be an interesting time for us to see, what level the program will be at. I do think, and I'm probably going to morph into your next question if you don't mind. I do think the program will continue. The last not the last executive order, the last presidential determination that Trump issued just before he left office, talked about refugees who were persecuted because of religion, which meant Christians and Jews and Baha'is and others. It didn't mean Muslims, unfortunately. He talked about Iraqis who had served the U.S. government. I think this administration is going to have an obligation to continue to fulfill our obligations towards our Afghan allies, people who worked for the U.S. military and the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan for 20 years. So I think that will be able to continue. And then I think there'll probably be some populations around the world that will be of interest to them. And, maybe refugees from Latin America, Venezuelans, people coming out of Colombia, as a way to maybe take pressure off the southern border. I do expect obviously there's been a lot of pronouncements about deportations, but it would be politically wise to have something that would be a bit of a carrot as well to show that we still have some concern for people who are in these dire protection circumstances. And maybe my last little thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is just kind of to remind everybody, this program historically has been about protection. It's not a skill-based program. It was a question that I was asked sometimes up on the Hill. We're bringing people who speak English, right? Or we're bringing people who can integrate, which means what? Maybe they're educated. Maybe they can get a higher level job. No, we're bringing people who need protection. We're bringing people who fled for their lives or their well-being. We're bringing people who have in some case been tortured. We're bringing people who deserve a second chance, and our country is providing that. And I think that's one of the things that we need to all remember And I think going back to Kirsten's pitch about talking to your elected officials, make sure they understand that refugees are part of our kind of our humanitarian DNA of, how our country and how our faiths were created, and our belief system. And they do great, and they, are employable, and they enrich communities. But at the same time, we have an obligation to help these people, and we should try to continue that during the next Trump administration.
Thank you, Larry. I first wanted to say the feeling is mutual. We're really thankful to have you on our board also. And my heart just swelled with your last part when you were talking about these are people that need protection, and they and we have the opportunity to give people a second chance at life and hope. And so thank you for sharing that. Despite some of the challenges, I heard you say that most people believe in doing the right thing, and that includes many folks in Congress, many folks creating our laws, and our community members. So thank you for lifting that up. One other thing I do want to ask you to touch on, because of your experience with the refugee admissions program, um, with these more restrictive policies, what has the global impact of that been? And then what would it look like potentially for refugees overseas if they were no longer able to arrive?
Yeah, what's interesting for people to know is the US is one of maybe 25 or 26 countries that resettle refugees. We're by far the largest, and certainly we're under Biden. Not so much under Trump. Canada's large, they go between 25 and 35,000 a year. Australia, 12 to 15,000 a year, depending on how you count. And those are the big three. And then a lot of the European countries, do hundreds or maybe a few thousand. So when when the US loses, which I think we will, large numbers, there won't really be anyone who can take those refugees from us. So the volume will immediately be diminished, and that's to the worldwide program. The what we've always done, frankly, even when we had a large program, is if we have urgent cases that the US couldn't process quickly or maybe got stuck in our system for some reason, we were able to work with other governments to see if they could accept those refugees. So I do think there will be some urgent cases that the UN Agency for Refugees will ask us to give back to them, which is they're our number one source of referrals, and that those then could be given to another country. What that might mean for a refugee here is that if their family member overseas urgently needs to leave, they might not come to the US. So you might miss an opportunity for family reunification, but you will still gain a protection benefit by having that person out of harm's way and in a country where they can be supported in kind of reshaping their lives. So again, I think those will be small numbers, hundreds perhaps, certainly not large, but overall the large number of refugees in our system will languish, frankly, which is what happened last time. They stayed in our system. We kept them, all the work we had done, we kept that, but refugees simply had to wait. And because President Biden was elected and he reopened the program in a big way, then those refugees were able to benefit. And a lot of those cases, I will tell you, were prioritized, the ones that had languished. They were prioritized these last 4 years, and many of them have arrived. And so I think that is another accomplishment the Biden administration can really point to, is kind of unlocking a lot of these old cases. And so again, that might have to be done again, if some of these things occur.
Thanks, Larry. And part of what you're sharing is heartbreaking, I think, for many of us. And it's helpful to be reminded that we're part of a global network, that there are other folks in the work with us, and that we have seen the resiliency and the nimbleness of the of the work of welcome, that we look for other ways to be able to do that, no matter what system that we have to work in. So thank you so much. Mamadou, my next questions are for you. Mamadou, you have been with LSSNCA for the last 20 years and during past periods of significant policy change. What was the impact of refugee policy changes enacted by the previous Trump administration on LSSNCA and its clients?
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. I want to join Christine in welcoming you all to the town hall and also thanking you for your unwavering support to the work we do. And then piggyback a little bit on what Larry said earlier. I think it is important to remember that whenever we hear about reduction in U.S. refugee admission numbers, it means lives. Lives are being impacted in many ways. It means families that will continue to be separated. It means families that will be lingering in refugee camps much longer. It means lives and that will have less protection and less protection to thousands of people for whom resettlement was the last resort. I remember when the executive order 13769, also referred to as the Muslim ban, was signed, the first group to be impacted was the families that we had on flights. We had refugees on flight heading to the United States. Those flights were diverted, many of them to Cairo in Egypt, and never made it to the United States. We also had families waiting to be reunited with loved ones. So we had to pick up the phone, call those families, and let them know that the family member for whom they have already secured an apartment or a house, furnished that apartment, that those families will not be arriving, that they need to go and cancel all of those planning. The second group that were impacted was our staff, our team, dedicated team members. They were the ones calling those families to share those dreadful news. And they were in the first row of the sorrow and pain that those families were experiencing. And the third group impacted is our communities. And that's each one of you, because although refugees are resettled through resettlement agencies, they are members of the communities that they join. And at LSSNCA, we saw under the Obama administration, huge numbers of refugees. In fact, in 2014, LSSNCA reached the milestone of 1,000 refugees resettled in 1 year. And in 2016, we resettled 1,600 refugees. So what happened under the Trump 1.0 is a huge drop from where those numbers were to less than 400 or 500 refugees a year, both in Virginia and Maryland. So that impacted LSSNCA numbers. It impacted our staff, our workforce, and it impacted our geographical footprint as well. But I remember what a former refugee, Albert Einstein, said, and that is, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And LSSNCA were able to work with communities to explore ways that we will continue to provide support to those refugees that are here. Because we also need to remember that the refugees are not just those that are coming from overseas, but it's also the thousands of refugees that are already here. So as the overseas resettlement pipeline dries up, it is very important that we continue to advocate for more protection for refugees. But we also need to remember those that are here that need additional support and find ways to provide that support. So the LSSNCA, we were able to do that by looking at sustainable operation and maintain those operations so that the rebuilding phase would be a little bit easier on all of us.
Thank you, Mamadou. It's really helpful to have that reminder of there's so many folks here who we have welcomed, and we need to continue making sure that they feel welcomed and valued. And that's part of the long welcome, as we say at LSSNCA. Thank you for that reminder, and thank you for the reminder that we need to continue to advocate for those who may not be able to come here into the United States in, the next coming months, but still it is their hope to arrive here in the United States. My next question for you is, what lessons can we draw from LSSNCA's past experiences to inform how we navigate the challenges and opportunities a new administration may bring?
It's great question. Well, for many challenges in life, we have two options. Option one is sit and not do nothing. And the second option is to roll up our sleeves and see what we can do with the means that we have and the cards that we dealt with. And I think that those are the lessons that we need to draw from the Trump 1.0. LSSNCA is blessed to have a very solid support in the communities. And that support has really showed up in the past and helped LSSNCA leverage resources that have helped sustain our operations during those tough years. The second lesson, I think, it's the power of advocacy. There are so many changes during the Trump 1.0 that were pushed, but the community response and the community advocacy have helped take some major steps to not just push back on those measures, but also to find ways to continue to support the work that we do. The third one will be how important our team, our workforce is to the work that we do. And that is because many of our LSSNCA seasoned staff members chose to stay with LSSNCA and to fight along the LSSNCA leadership to help with the rebuilding. But I think if I had just maybe one lesson to draw from it, it would be how important advocacy is to what we do. Some of you may remember that pre-Trump 1.0, refugee resettlement agencies had only to consult with the states and get their approval to resettle refugees. During the Trump administration, it was brought down to local communities. So we had to consult with local counties and cities and get approval from each one of those jurisdictions and each one of those entities before we are able to place refugees in those places. That's where the local advocacy come in. Whatever you can do to help with advocacy of city, county officials so that they can support refugees and continue to support refugees that will be assigned to their specific jurisdictions.
Thank you, Mamadou. I think we can all agree that your option one of sitting and doing nothing is not an option. It's why we're all here. So thank you for all those ways and reminders that the community can really show up. In just a moment, we're going to turn it over for Q&A from the community. And I would like to invite you to use, you'll see on at the bottom of your screen, there's a little box that has a question mark in it. That's the Q&A chat, and you can drop questions in there. We do have one question to get started with here. For whoever wants to answer this question, it's a hopeful question. So this is a challenging and uncertain time. What keeps you hopeful for the future?
Well, I go first. I'm a former refugee. I was refugee in Senegal for many years. I was in refugee camp, so I know what it feels to sit for 11 years waiting on someone in the United States to advocate for Mamadou to be able to resettle in the United States. So what kept me hopeful is that I remember that the people that advocated for me to be here, I may never meet them. And yet I'm here because of them and thanks to them. And I want all of us to remember that as we advocate for refugees. The people that we're advocating for and we're fighting for, we may never see them, but they will never forget about us. And that's the message of hope that kept me fighting every day for these refugees.
Thank you, Mamadou. Does anybody else want to answer? Yeah, go for it.
And of course, Mamadou, we are so lucky and blessed to have you at LSSNCA, and your experience is so important as we are, creating really human-centered programs, and keep that in mind. For me, I feel hopeful when I look around at my colleagues, like those of you on this call, and the rest of our team, and the communities we serve, and all of you who chose to spend your lunch hour with us. And what I see is people who are working to make the world a better place. And I feel hope when I hear stories of my friends and colleagues and our program participants who have fled life or death situations and who still have such a deep well of gratitude and hope and faith. And one of those stories that I'll share is our colleague who is the director of our Virginia Performance and Quality Improvement Program. And he started working for us in 2021. He had recently been evacuated from Afghanistan and wanted to get back to the community and to the community that helped him. And when he left, he not only left his homeland, but he left behind his pregnant wife and a small child and his parents. And it took 3 years for Rahat's wife and children and his parents to arrive. And they did in March of 2024. And Rahat shared pictures with me of meeting his son for the first time and of his kids on their first day of school. And that gives me hope. And overall, I just feel hopeful knowing that there's always been communities behind movements of love and justice and change. And that's our job. And that's why we are here. And this is a calling for us to show up and do more.
So maybe I'll add one other thing, and Mamadou, I loved your intervention, so I really didn't want to talk in addition to it, but I just want to say, as a former career senior executive at the State Department, the number of people at the State Department, Health and Human Services, and Department of Homeland Security who are career professionals, they're not political appointees, experienced and smart and dedicated, that will continue. And if the program shrinks, obviously some of the staffing will be lost. But this program was legislated by Congress in 1980. I continue to maintain that it still has congressional support on both sides of the aisle. So again, I think if there are some lean years that we're looking at, I do think that rebuilding will again be possible. I think there were a lot of lessons learned under the Biden administration about how to rebuild the program in a smart way, use smarter tools, accelerate the resettlement process. And a lot of those things were accomplished. And so those are not lost. Those are lessons learned that will be maintained. And I think if the climate changes around refugee resettlement, the program can pivot once again. So that gives me hope. And the other thing I will say in terms of giving me hope is I visit a lot of U.S. communities. And I think at the local level, the volunteerism, the faith groups, the support for refugee resettlement is super strong, including in my former home state of Wisconsin. And I went out to do a community meeting because of some people who weren't supportive, but I found, in fact, there were many more who were supportive than the few voices who were loud and unsupportive. So again, that gives me hope.
Thank you. I think we can all use a little hope. Thank you for sharing all of that. We have a couple questions that are all related to a similar theme. And they are basically, if somebody is waiting, they've like, for example, have a P2 visa, or they want to be reunified with family here in the United States. And I know some of this we might have to make our best educated guess. There are questions about the hope of reunification. Is that possible? Are they out of luck? What information do we have?
So let me jump in. First of all, just to let you know, there is no such thing as a P2 visa. P2 is a designation under the Refugee Admissions Program, which allowed an application to be filed, and in this case for an Afghan, it allowed an application to be filed by a government agency or perhaps US media or the military on behalf of an Afghan who had a bona fide relationship with the US. So it's a category. There are a number of people in that system. That's one of the things the Biden administration prioritized for the last 2 to 3 years, was processing people who were in the P2 segment, as well as people who were special immigrant visa applicants, if you will, right? So there's two different tracks. I think those, I mean, I would be surprised if they don't continue. Again, I'm not sure they will continue at the same level, but I think both the SIV program and the P2 refugee program will continue. I think it'll be hard to stop it because I think it has too much support, especially from former military. But I think that's an opportunity, I think, to talk to your elected officials on the Hill about why this is important, because there are people, many who not just work for us, but also are members of families, and part of those families are here and part are not. And so again, as long as they can continue to leave Afghanistan through this program, which they can, I think we have a real obligation to continue that. For other populations that are in our system where their family unity issues, some members here, some member is somewhere else, maybe they're in Tanzania, maybe they're Congolese. I think those programs, unfortunately, are probably going to diminish in number, and that people will, in some cases, not be allowed to arrive simply because the numbers won't allow it. And again, I think that's another opportunity, I think, to talk to people, elected officials, both at the local level as well as the Washington level, about why these programs are important. Because again, the Trump administration made a lot of rhetoric around family, the importance of family. This is family, and this is about helping. Frankly, it helps the people who are overseas. It also helps the people who are here, because a stronger family unit in the U.S. will be a more successful story in terms of integration.
That springboard of family for advocacy is really a helpful one, Larry. Thank you so much. We have a really great question, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this. The question is, what's the best way we can support LSSNCA in this challenging time?
Thanks, Christine. You may have noticed that we planned this town hall on Giving Tuesday. And although there are so many ways to support our mission, as we are expecting a significant decrease in government funding, financial support from the community is more important now than ever. There is a link to donate on our website. I can put it in the Q&A in a moment. LSSNCA.org is our website. We also accept checks. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to discuss planned giving options or other creative ways to give. Our development team would be happy to talk to you about those areas. We are also always looking for volunteers, foster parents, employers who want to hire refugees, landlords interested in renting to refugees, and you can find these ways and more on our website under How to Help. And then, as we've mentioned, advocacy and education, whether that's with your local community, whether that's with your elected officials, whether it's at upcoming holiday parties or over the dinner table, it's so important.
Thank you, Kristen. We have a question in the chat related to unaccompanied the minor program. So the question is, how will the unaccompanied minor program be affected by the anticipated changes from the new administration?
So let me jump in just from past experience. The unaccompanied refugee minor program, right? Because there's asylees as well. But the refugee program is super small. I mean, it's, I think, numerically maybe 300 maximum across the United States. So super small program, but really, really important, right? I mean, these are unaccompanied refugees. They're not orphans usually, but their caregiver, their parent, is simply not with them, and the UN has done some work to determine that resettlement would be the best thing for them. We're not separating somebody from a family. We're really providing urgent and important protection. What happened last time around, I don't want to tell too many stories of what happened inside the government, but we made, at the State Department, those of us who were career people made a pitch to some of the political leadership to continue that program. And it was also at the time when there was a large number of people coming at the southwest border who were also unaccompanied, right? So if you remember when families were perhaps deliberately separating children from parents so that they could gain access. And so at the time, we were told that in fact the situation at the southwest border was more important, and it was on our doorstep, and that we needed to focus on that. So frankly, the program was not really allowed to continue um, at any level. So again, that could be the option, but again, to me, I want to believe that making humanitarian arguments to human beings who are elected to our government at some level will resonate. And whether it's unaccompanied children in, 100 to 200 level, which is nothing in terms of carrying capacity, or whether it's Afghan allies who worked with us, or some really specific cases that are urgent, including the ones that Mamadou talked about, which were people who were just about to get on a plane on January 20th. Um, I think I want to believe those will resonate with someone, and perhaps with the Secretary of State, perhaps with the new Secretary of Homeland Security, and that those arguments can be made persuasively.
Any additional comments related to unaccompanied refugee minors?
Thanks, Christine. And I think I have no notes to what Larry said. But this is a population that continues to be of concern to LSSNCA. You may know this is our 50th year of serving unaccompanied children. We served our first unaccompanied child in 1974. And so we will continue to advocate for this very vulnerable of a very vulnerable population.
One
Thank
other
you.
thing I would say, just for those who are concerned about the program and the U.S. perhaps diminishing it, there are not a lot of other countries around the world that actually can receive unaccompanied refugee minors. They don't have the systems in place. The U.S. does. They don't have the numbers within their program. And so we have always been the largest kind of partner for the UN Refugee Agency to help unaccompanied refugee minors. So if we can't take them, they clearly will simply stay where they are. They will become the age of majority, and then they will be in a different phase of their life, but they won't be able to benefit from the, I think, tremendous program that the U.S. has set up.
Thank you, Larry. We have a question that is related to humanitarian parole. And it said, the question is, what do you think will happen with Afghans and Ukrainians, or likely anyone here on humanitarian parole, not as refugees, who are still in the process of getting permanent status?
I'll take a start. I think for the Afghans, the intention all along was to bring people in under parole and allow them to adjust status by applying for a green card, which means claiming asylum, and having a bona fide asylum claim, which all Afghans, frankly, with the U.S. affiliation do. and then getting their green card and then being in the pathway to citizenship. So I think that will continue. I don't think that is at risk. Again, I think that would be a huge political liability if the Trump administration were try to undo it. For the Ukrainian program, the Ukrainians that came under the U4U program were never intended to be people who would gain gain permanent status. So again, people can make an individual claim in terms of well-founded fear of persecution, but in the case of Ukrainians, it's harder. It seems a little bizarre that people fleeing a war couldn't claim asylum, but under U.S. law, they actually have to have an individual claim of potential persecution or past persecution. And so I think it's harder for them to make that claim, and there really isn't a system in place to put them into the green card system. So I think eventually that program will discontinue, and it'll be up to the Trump administration to decide when that is, and perhaps it'll involve, the whatever peace talks they wanted to have with Russia and Ukraine. What the ability is for people to go home.
And I think, Larry, that it is believed that the support for the Afghan program will continue just because of their military involvement as well.
Great, thank you. Um, a lot of the other questions we've answered in a couple different ways. There are a couple questions related to protecting clients, like one of them is, what is LSSNCA doing to protect clients who might be at risk of deportation? And there's another question that would be likely a corollary in terms of community partners. What ways will we be able to support community partners in the work of welcome?
But let me maybe give you, over the past couple of years, LSSNCA has worked hard to beef up its legal services. And it was partly in anticipation of what could happen. We will continue through our legal services to provide guidance to clients that might be impacted. But the vast majority of the clients that we have currently, especially the Afghan clients, we have already assisted them with submitting their asylum applications. It is for sure that there will be some client that could be facing that risk, and whatever we can do through our legal services or advocacy and outreach to pro bono lawyers, immigration lawyers that are willing to help would be something that we will explore as well. Christian?
I support what you said too, Mamadou. I know that, I guess what I'll add is, as I mentioned earlier, one of our newer programs is our legal services program. And there are ways to volunteer with our legal services program on our website. And that is, amping up and strengthening and supporting our legal services program right now is so important. So we can help folks prepare for what's to come with Know Your Rights presentations and safety planning and other initiatives. So that would be another area as you're looking for things to support. Legal services is a big need right now.
Maybe one other thing I would add, and it probably is obvious, but for anyone who has an intention to file an asylum application or some other type of legal action, if you will, to regularize their status, they should not wait. Sometimes people procrastinate for a bunch of reasons, but what we found last time is that people who were further along in the system were advantaged, if you will, or at least not disadvantaged. For people who, and I've seen this and this is totally different situation, but for people who had never adjusted status, were much more vulnerable to deportation, right? So I think, again, having something, the asylum backlog is huge. It will take years for many people to get through it. But simply having an application does give you another form of protection.
Thank you. I think I want to give a great big thank you to our panelists for sharing their knowledge and some really concrete information, being honest, and also sharing all the ways the community can continue to be involved in the work of welcome. As the Director of Community Engagement, I have the honor of connecting community members with our work. And there are just so many ways that you can make a difference, including numerous volunteering opportunities like mentoring and tutoring. You've also heard us talk about opportunities for congregations and community groups to assist with apartment setups. This is a huge help and a big need for our families. And additionally, as Kristen mentioned, we have our resource center in Alexandria, Virginia, and it's a fabulous way to do one-off or ongoing volunteering. And so however you choose to make a difference, you can find lots of ways to do that by visiting our website, lssnca.org, and you can click on how to help or donate, and to give your time, your money, or your resources. We will really need your support more than ever in this upcoming year. And thank you again for being with us all this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.